So, next one up, we're going to talk about a pretty big moment that happened just in the last little bit here, which was Connor McDavid surpassing 1,000 points, which is absolutely insane to think about. He got drafted in the 2015 draft, which does not feel that long ago, truthfully. I remember watching this draft and thinking that this man already has 1,000 points is absolutely bonkers to me. He broke it against Nashville and has, I mean, it's pretty much just giving us a chance to talk about the absolute dominance that has been Connor McDavid, what he has done to the game of hockey in the last few years. And I mean, I don't even know where to start with this guy. That's the funny thing. Like, we could go down the list of awards. We could go down the list of thousands of different trophies he's won at this point and expectations that he shattered. But this feels like an insane question to ask you, Caleb. I'm going to ask you anyway, just to put you on the spot. What do you think about Connor McDavid surpassing 1,000 points in 659 games in this current era? What is your immediate thought at that?
Well, I think my immediate thought links back to the end of that question you just posed, and that's the era part of it, right? And I think that's the most impressive part of it, because I think that the stat I have here. So, my immediate thought when getting into this is, okay, obviously very impressive. Who are the other players to have done it faster? Like, if we're looking at an on-pace type of projection, who are the other players who have done it faster? There's only three. I don't know if do you want to take a shot in the dark at who the three are, Simon?
Gosh, I have no idea. Gretzky, Lemieux, Bossy.
Yeah, there you go. I assume you might have had that pulled up with how quick.
No. I didn't have it pulled up. I've seen it though.
Okay. I mean, Gretzky and Lemieux are pretty obvious, and Bossy only beat him by 3 games. But whenever you are in conversation with those 3 players, especially the Gretzky and Lemieux conversation, it's incredible.
Even Bossy.
And
you have to realize
even
how Bossy is so
yes.
underrated as an all-time player. I think because you got to realize he didn't play that many games.
Before there was Gretzky, I mean, Mike Bossy was one of the with Trottier was one of the leaders of the dynasty that preceded the Oilers, right? And they were the biggest thorn in the Oilers' side.
Stopped the Oilers for a few years there.
Yes, exactly. They were the biggest thorn in the side of the Oilers before they became a dynasty. The Oilers had to overcome the Islanders because they were just that good. And Bossy was a huge part of that, probably the best player on that team. But again, going back to the era conversation, I think that's the other reason why this is so impressive, because, again, Gretzky took about 200 less games, Lemieux about 100 less games, but especially when Gretzky played, those stats are a little bit inflated, not to discount Gretzky at all. But it is obviously much harder to score now in the time that McDavid's been in the league than it was in the 80s. And that really has to be said in terms of where he stands among the conversation with some of the greatest players of all time, because he is at a disadvantage because of the time that he plays in and how much less scoring there is now than there was back then. So I think with that in consideration especially, that's what makes this so impressive.
There's a lot of things that make this so impressive. I was curious what the difference is in average numbers of goals per game comparing from the 80s to now, to give an idea of what. Let's see. So back in the 80s, on average, almost exactly, it was 4 goals per game back in 1980, 1981. In 2022, 2023, that was at 3.23, which is closer than I would have thought, but it's still
over a larger scale. That's a big difference.
That is a big difference. That is absolutely a big difference. I mean,
a full goal per game over a season of data.
I'm not going to try
a pretty
and do
big
the math
deal
on that. Breaking, because in my head, I just immediately go times that. We don't need to go down that road and see how close it would be. But what McDavid has done is insanely impressive. I mean, even if you just want to talk about the teammates, he, in comparison to Gretzky and Lemieux, I mean, McDavid's obviously had Draisaitl, he's had Nugent Hopkins, he's had guys, but you got to realize that by this point, I believe Lemieux probably had a few cups. Gretzky definitely had a few cups. The teams that both of them had were just absolutely insanely stacked, and that can't necessarily be said about McDavid. And I think, I don't know, everybody already gives McDavid a ton of credit, but I don't think that, I don't think it can be emphasized enough, the absolute domination we're seeing, because I think that it is domination that has only really been seen like when you compare guys Bobby Orr, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Connor McDavid. That is that list now. McDavid has added himself to that list. You can make the argument for a few other guys being on that list, but when I think pure dominance in hockey, I think that without a doubt at this point, if you don't have Connor McDavid on that list, you're being biased against, I guess, current time, like the current era of hockey. Because I think at this point, what McDavid is doing is absolutely, it's undeniable at this point. I think that he's playing on, I mean, at this point, the teams he's on are a lot better, that's for sure. But he's been playing on worse teams and putting up crazy numbers, and it just, I don't even know, man. Like, it's hard to even put into words what he's done.
I would push. The only thing I would push back, I would push back against something and emphasize something a little bit more. And the thing I'd push back against is by saying he's played on much worse teams. Even with that, he still had Draisaitl his entire time as an Oiler, and you can't understate that. And the Oilers have always had like good top end talent. Their issue has never been producing points. Their issue, from their top scorers at least, their issue has always been depth. So
that's fair too.
Like in terms of pure point scoring, yes, I don't think that the team around him has ever been an issue in that regard. It's more so been like in terms of wins where they haven't been able to get that side of it. So I would de-emphasize that a little bit because obviously, yes, Gretzky had more cups, Lemieux had more cups, but that's issues with other parts of the team, and it's obviously a much more competitive NHL now than it was, again, in the 80s or 90s. The part I would emphasize a little bit more is if people are leaving McDavid out of the all-time great conversation, at this point, what are you doing? Right? Yeah. Because we've had enough of a sample size to know. And I think the question that I would like to ask is that's even a bit, because obviously Gretzky is the greatest of all time, and I'm not trying to push against that at this point, at least. But I think if you put McDavid in the era that Gretzky played in, with his same set of skills, I know it's not fair. It's not fair. But it's a hypothetical. I can phrase whatever hypothetical I would like. So, like, if you put him in that era, I think there's a chance he even outpaces Gretzky, in my opinion.
You say there's a chance. I say there's a guarantee. Without a doubt, McDavid would outpace Gretzky. I don't think that's controversial. The game has evolved in such a crazy way. But you need to understand that it is just not fair to try and make that argument. Because it's the same reason why whenever I bring up these all-time conversations, you have to say eras. You have to bring up the fact that they played in two different times. They grew up in two different times. Gretzky grew up in a time where the skates they used were so garbage. You saw the way they used to skate. Yes. That shit don't work. Like, you need to understand, if you're going to make an argument like that, let's have Gretzky be born in, when was McDavid born? 1997. Let's say Gretzky was born in 1997 with the work ethic he had, with all of the things that he had growing up. Does he do the same thing as McDavid? I think it's the same conversation, and it's an impossible conversation to have. Because it
is, and that's a fair point. I think what I fight against more is people who, like you kind of pointed out a little bit before, is people who overvalue the older times just because they are more established. Because I think you see that happen in a lot of other sports where the contributions of newer players get diminished just because they haven't been around for long enough, and it just seems impossible to compare a guy like McDavid to a guy like Gretzky, because Gretzky has been enshrined, rightfully, as the greatest player of all time for so long. But I think it's fair to at least start kind of pushing those boundaries and asking those questions,
Yep.
even when in the end I think you're right in terms of it is almost impossible to compare because of how the game has changed. Um, yeah.
I think that it's also the fact that they're two very different players. Gretzky wasn't the superhuman athlete that McDavid is.
No,
I think
no.
that in a lot of ways, there's a reason that Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby, when you look at when they were being brought up and hyped up, Sidney Crosby was brought in as the next Gretzky. That's what a lot of people thought. And I think there are a lot more comparables there because a lot of what made Gretzky such a good player was his mind. He is the smartest hockey player to ever play. He was 10 steps above anybody else on the ice. And that's not something that McDavid necessarily... He's still really, really good. It feels like I'm crapping on him, but you need to understand that there was a reason that this skinny kid... And you got to realize, in an era... You can say what you want about the 80s era of hockey. You can't say that it wasn't physical. And Gretzky was 5'10", like 100 and whatever. He was a stick. He was a stick. One big hit and he was done. But he made an insane career out of that. I actually would make the argument that, I know you brought up the fact that a lot of people diminish what McDavid is doing now and what newer players are doing now because of what people have done in the past. I would think at this point, a lot of people are doing the opposite. I've seen a lot of people diminishing what Gretzky has done because, they couldn't raise the puck or whatever. Like, whatever reason you want to bring up. And I think it's not fair because you need to realize that Gretzky took an era and completely flipped it on its head. He took a style, and a style that shouldn't have worked at the time. No one thought it would. There was a reason he didn't get drafted to the NHL. No one...
Okay. I'm gonna stick a pin in that. It's not like he didn't get drafted to the NHL. It's that he was so good that he wanted to go professional, and the NHL didn't allow people to go in.
I misspoke.
Yeah. Just to correct the historical record.
Yeah. Okay, that's my bad. I shouldn't have said that. You're right. But I think that you just need to think of the era. I think more than anything else. I think that McDavid came in with a style that works now. Gretzky came in with a style that shouldn't have and absolutely lit the entire world on fire. I think that's the biggest... That's the one difference to me. Where, like...
I was just gonna say, as I like tore you down with my fact checking.
No, it's okay. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I shouldn't have said that. I was on a roll. I shouldn't have said that.
I will back up your overall argument though. In terms of like I think you're right in terms of the transformation of hockey, because when you look at the 80s, and I mean, like, yes, it was high scoring, but I think Gretzky pioneered a lot of that, right? Yes. Like, I think that's the argument you're making, essentially. Yeah. Because before that, I mean, it's the Broad Street Bullies, it's the physicality of the game.
Not even before.
And he was able to come
that's when Gretzky came in. You need to realize that was exactly the beginning of the 80s.
That's what I mean, yes. Yeah. In terms of, like, there was an alteration there, and because of that one player. So yes, and I mean to the whole point about people devaluing Gretzky, I have seen that online in terms of like the whole can't raise the puck
everybody's
thing.
Heard it.
I just think that's stupid, and I don't really give it any time. I've seen it kind of. I guess it kind of goes both ways. The one other argument I will make in terms of I think Gretzky's ability to change the game is much more influential than McDavid has been. I would agree with that. Yeah. In terms of changing the style of play. However, I do think there is still very much because of his athleticism, a certain style of play it's not maybe as influential, but is significantly more unique and special in terms of the plays where you just see him zoom down the ice
and
at
to argue
a faster rate
against
than anybody
myself,
ever can.
To argue against myself, one could make the argument that at this point there's less to influence. It's Gretzky hockey at the time when Gretzky came in. You have to realize it was not as big. It was not as big of a thing. Gretzky, when he came in, especially there's a big conversation to be had about hockey existing in lower, like Southern America. Not Southern America, Southern U.S. Southern U.S.
Well, yeah, like
existing down there because of Gretzky. L.A. The Kings were, they were getting ready to pack their bags. Like, it was not looking good down there. Nobody was coming to games. Gretzky came in and changed that, and I think there's just not really room for that as much anymore for McDavid. He's certainly done a lot, I think, to evolve the game. That's not what I was saying, because I think players like Cale Makar. Cale Makar is a good example. I think guys who just play with speed and that athleticism, maybe giving credit to McDavid isn't fair. I think that just the game as a whole has always been moving towards that. But I think the speed of McDavid has forced other people to get better with him, and I think that has caused for guys to obviously raise their games, and my brain just immediately goes Cale Makar, because that's another guy who's just pure athleticism and obviously has shown up in the playoffs to stop McDavid.
Yes, so that was going to be my point, is like, if you want to make the argument for McDavid as an innovator and like as more of a paradigm shift, then you have to look at, well, what are teams doing in response? And they are entirely game planning around how do we stop this one guy and this one specific skill set, right? Like, that's the argument you can make, because it is a skill set that's so unique that you have to start building a roster around how to stop this one player, and I think that's pretty special. I'm not sure where to go with this from here, because I mean there's not much more that can be.
It's funny how this turned into a Gretzky versus Connor McDavid segment.
But that's just how.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's just almost how this has to go, right? Because
it's the direction it's going.
Gretzky and it's Gretzky, Lemieux, Crosby, McDavid, and there's been a progression of that, and because they've been the anchoring stars of each decade, right? Gretzky in the 80s, Lemieux in the 90s, Crosby in the 2000s, and then McDavid in the 2010s going into the 2020s.
My question to you, like, I have a firm opinion on this already. I'm gonna ask it to you, because I've seen a lot of people saying this online. Where in that exact ranking you just gave of it's Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid. Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid. Who's above the other?
I'm placing McDavid above Crosby at this point.
Okay. Really? Okay.
Yes. Well, I think Crosby has the benefit of longevity, but I think I think it's that paradigm shift that we talked about, and I think McDavid, it just flashes a lot more. I don't know. This isn't because I really want people to key in on the fact that we are again talking about potentially the 4 greatest players in the history of the sport, if not something close to that. So it's not like I'm saying Crosby is bad by any means, but I do think McDavid overall has had a greater impact.
It pisses me off because people are undervaluing what Crosby has done for the game because of McDavid, and it pisses me off so much because I think that it's two different players. It's two separate conversations. Like,
yes, but I again, that's why I wanted to make sure I emphasize that within the context of it, I can prefer McDavid to Crosby in that discussion, but still not disregard what Crosby is.
That's fair. That's fair. Like, that feels like an avoidant answer, but I get what you mean. I understand
because it's important to understand that context, because I mean, you can put it out there for clicks and YouTube comments or whatever to just say McDavid's better than Crosby and come eat my ass if you disagree. But there's more context to it than that.
Yeah, no, that's fair too. I will say, to give my opinion on it, I do not think McDavid has passed Crosby yet. Win a cup. I think that has to come before.
That's fair. That's
my opinion. I think that you could get all the personal accolades you want, but I want to see a cup. For McDavid, I think he wins that one cup. If he won that cup last year, I would put him above Crosby. I don't think you need to win because of the rate he's going at. I think that he's absolute. And I will also, before I get a bunch of Oilers fans screaming at me in the comments, I do think McDavid will pass Crosby. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that 27-year-old McDavid versus, 36, 37, maybe 38-year-old Crosby, I would still give it to Crosby, overall legacy-wise. But the fact that it's close should tell you something about Connor McDavid as a hockey player. I just think he needs a cup. I think he needs a cup. I think the rest of the accolades, it's all there. I think it's like, I'm not making an argument over like points. Like, sure, Crosby has more, but also again, like 10 years older. I think more.
Yeah.
Like, it's a whole other ball game. So I mean,
I agree with you, and the point I'll kind of end the discussion off on is that in the cup discussion, it's so much harder to win a cup now than in the 80s, than in the 90s, even when Crosby was winning his cups. Like, less so obviously with Crosby, but it has a lot to do with the team that's built around you.
In the 2010s,
Crosby in the 2010s at least had the benefit of a much better team built around him, in my opinion. McDavid in the playoffs is doing all he can.
That Oilers team was good.
That Oilers team was good.
I'd have to look back at those Penguin squads, I guess.
There's a reason it went to 7, but it's tough. It's really tough because I switch it over to a different sports GOAT conversation.
Sure.
And there's a reason we look at Super Bowls when we talk about quarterbacks. It's like, who's the GOAT? Well, it's almost now unanimously Brady, but because he won 7 Super Bowls. And I think that's fair because as the quarterback, still if you have a shitty team around you, you're not going to win the Super Bowl. But it's a lot easier to say this is a direct influence. As a first-line center in hockey, that's a lot harder to do because if your goalie's shit, if your depth is shit, which McDavid experienced for a lot of his career, then you're not going to be able to win no matter how well you play. So that's the only asterisk I would add to the Cups argument, but I'm also not necessarily disagreeing.
Like, I get it if it's
I'm not
1 or 2.
Necessarily disagreeing.
Okay, yeah, fair. I won't argue with it.
But I do want to add that context to it.
Sure. I get that.
But
that does make a lot of sense because I agree with you. I think it is way more important in football. But I also think that McDavid hasn't passed Crosby in really any statistical thing yet. He's at a higher pace, but that's a different conversation.
But it's an important one because McDavid can't have just been born earlier. So that's what we have to look at right now.
Well, right? And it's also, funnily enough, it's also an era thing because the dead puck era was very much a thing. Like, it's a stupid conversation, and I would happily sit here for 4 hours and have it because I love this shit. I will happily argue with anybody about it because
it's a fun hypothetical.
It is. To give my prediction for 10 years down the road, I think that we are going to end up having a very similar issue to what basketball has right now with LeBron James and Michael Jordan, with one guy having a lot of personal accolades. He did a lot of things, but he didn't win as many cups. And there's going to be a lot of people having that argument, and it's going to be an interesting world to live in. I think that you could also make the argument that cups, or in basketball, rings, is probably more important, similar to NFL, than it is in hockey, because that's a lot more star-based. Again, similar to the argument for a quarterback. So it's going to be interesting. I'm very curious to see what that's going to look like down the road. But who knows?
It will be interesting to see how that debate changes, to your point, because, again, in the NFL, I think it's not as much of a debate now, but Mahomes is coming for that title. I think, again, in the NBA, it is a debate. But in hockey, Gretzky, Lemieux, but Lemieux, his career being like kind of on and off.
I mean, if you want to talk about pace, Lemieux's the guy to talk about that.
Exactly, and it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to play longer over a more sustained period than he did. But it'll be interesting to see how the Gretzky McDavid debate shapes up over time, because I think you're right, and I think if McDavid is able to win a couple of cups, especially, I think the dynamic of that
Oh,
debate will
absolutely.
change and fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. If he wins, I would set the bar if he keeps going at the pace he's going and wins 2 cups. I think he gets it. I think he surpasses Gretzky. And I know you know what's funny? You're agreeing with me, but I know there's gonna be people in the comments who disagree with me on that. But you gotta realize what McDavid is doing. And when I say keep pace, I mean not slow down, not slow down for a very long time. He needs to get very far. I don't think there's a chance in the fucking planet that he gets over Gretzky's point total. I don't think it happens. I it's there's just no way. There's absolutely it's unattainable for anybody. It's never going to happen. Unless they shrink the pads again, unless they make serious rule changes, we will never see scoring the way that Gretzky did it. And that being said, I don't think he needs to break those records to pass Gretzky. And I think that's not controversial saying that, but I don't know. You know what I mean. It's going to be very interesting when that time comes and we start actually having that conversation, because it's going to be really tough. That's the tough thing about what Gretzky did, is there will never be 100% of people going McDavid's the GOAT. Never going to happen because of what Gretzky did. That point total will never be touched. The goals is the only one that's attainable. Nobody's touching that assist. No one's getting close.